for the general public, they probably won't realise what poor weather effects have on farm and food production straight away. They probably start to feel those effects a little bit further down the line, and when you get a run of a few bad years, you'll notice the difference in production. So what's happened this year is something that's coming on the back of a lot of other challenges and issues that farming's got at the moment. And it's really a very poor harvest, but also structurally, we've lost a lot of the milling wheat sector. Now, farming on the Isle of Man particularly is quite there's a lot of symbiosis, so you get one sector will rely on another sector, and everybody relies on each other to keep that balance, and we've just suddenly lost that balance. So in the short term, people are importing straw because we have to. It seems a bizarre thing to say, but we actually have to import straw. I know some people are trying to use old hay, which is far from ideal, but ultimately you have a situation where you have to consider animal welfare above everything else, and you have to provide them with some housing and some bedding. You can't not do that. You can't expect animals to stand on concrete, for instance. So it really is bedding. Straw is really a huge priority for farms at this time of year. So it's a massive problem, and the cost of importing it has been a significant hit on an industry that's got extreme cash flow problems from the last couple of years.
And then obviously that cost that the farmer is now having to endure will have to get passed down the line, won't it, onto the buyer?
Well, I think that might be spread across the whole of the UK as well, because we rely on a lot of imports on the island. Certainly, you cannot run a business running at a loss for a very long time. It's just not possible. Everybody that runs their own business knows that cash flow is king, and it certainly is on farm as well. So if you can't, you can't sustain those losses year on year. And what has happened over the last few years is that farming has lost that resilience that it had. So you can't cushion yourself against those kind of economic blows anymore. And we're starting to see it across all sectors now. And that's really quite worrying, is that I think that now and again you would see one sector might take a bit of a hit for certain circumstances, but it's not limited to the weather. The weather obviously does rule what happens on farm, but there's no resilience left to deal with that in the industry. And that's the problem we've got here on the Isle of Man. So I think ultimately people will see their food prices go up. We said this 2 years ago, and we said that before the impacts of the input cost rises, which I think you'll remember they more than trebled. They have come down since then, but this is the knock-on effect from that as well. So those input costs farmers had to bear on their own with the resources they had. So they might have come down now, but you won't see the effects of that for another couple of years. So it's this rolling effect all the time of the cost of production that is affecting, ultimately, the cost of people's food.
And sometimes there's a bit of a misconception, isn't there, that when you see the food on the shelves go up in price, actually the farmer's taking home a lump more than what you actually think.
Wouldn't that be nice?
The union did a report not so long ago with some help, and it came out that the shelf price is actually the farmer's only getting between 8 and 12%.
It's just a small fraction. When you go through the whole, the actual production side, then you go through the processing, and then you go through the retailer. The bulk of profits are retained by the retailer.
And would you say now that, especially with input costs, some of them have levelled off, but others are starting to rise again, aren't they? If it carries on with that, and now on the back of a straw shortage and having to import with extra costs, could you be at risk of really producing below the cost of production?
Well, I think yes, and I think sort of in some areas we already are. And again, that's not limited to the weather. That's agricultural support. So agricultural support, as you know, it's actually a food subsidy. And I think that's been cleverly by certain areas, not forgotten, but it's called agricultural support. But what that subsidy actually does is it suppresses the price of food to the general public. That's what it was designed for all those years ago, post-war. But this is how it's evolved. So it's evolved into a sort of profit-making mechanism for supermarkets now. So the price is suppressed to the farmer, and the supermarkets are profiting on the back of that cheap food subsidy that we have in place.